I don't know why. Just the way my brain works, I tend to gravitate towards things that are either very pure and wholesome or just vile and depraved. And there's not a whole lot of in between. Hello. So I have a new setup here, as you can see. Still trying to fine-tune it a little bit, but I think we're making progress. So here's the thing. It is time for my May reading wrap-up. And this month was a little bit weird. Not so much because the books themselves were weird. In fact, more so because they really weren't that weird. They were kind of normie books this month. Let's get started. The first book I want to talk about is called Lovely, Dark, and Deep by Megan Stockton. This story is about an island where the residents have to evacuate because of inclement weather. There's a huge storm coming. They have to get off the island until the storm is over. When this happens, shortly after most of the people have already left, but there's still some people who haven't yet, they find that a child is missing. They're kind of on the clock, trying to find this child before the storm hits. It doesn't seem like they might even be able to evacuate anymore, but at least they don't want the child to be outside and try to find a safe haven for them. This story, I rather enjoyed it. It has kind of nautical vibes to it. You know, you have this small island with this stormy weather and the rain and the water. I think the best part of this book is the vibes, the setting, the ambiance. You know, when you go outside before a big storm and you can kind of feel the electricity in the air. Like, I felt reading this like I could feel that kind of energy and that sense of foreboding of this weather coming and knowing that you're on the clock. I will say that that was the best part of this book. I didn't personally really connect with the characters very much, but I did really enjoy it for the vibes. It does have some body horror. It gets a little supernatural, I guess we'll say. I would recommend that to somebody if you're just looking for creepy, eerie vibes. Okay, so the next two that I want to talk about, I'm going to group together. They're actually the ones that I spoke about in my last video. Now, both of these are about the same true event that really did happen. So we have our first book, Perfect Victim, which was written by Christine McGuire, who is the DA who represented the state when this case went to trial. It is also co-written by Carla Norton, who is a professional writer and editor. She also attended the trial when it happened, obviously. The second book is by the victim, and it is called Colleen Stan, The Simple Gifts of Life, dubbed by the media, The Girl in the Box, and The Sex Slave. Her book was written by a man named Jim B. Green. He interviewed her and then they made the book. Both of these books are about Colleen Stan, who was kidnapped and held captive for 7 years by a man named Cameron Hooker and his wife Janice Hooker. You have the DA's book, which is focusing very much on the trial. It does give you the background of what happened to Colleen. She endured a lot in those 7 years. The intention of Cameron Hooker when he kidnapped her, basically someone that he could perform bondage on. He specifically wanted a woman who couldn't say no. And so they kidnapped Colleen with that intention of her being a slave for him, that he could do whatever he wanted to do to her. You have the DA's book. It's very factual, very well done, the way that the book is written. If you're curious about the case, that's probably the most well-rounded book to read. Now, the other book that's written by Colleen is going to be better if you want more information about her. It goes much more into her background, her before and after this whole captivity that she endured. It's also something that, you know, you feel like you're supporting the book that she signed off on. That being said, though, unfortunately, the second book, it does have spelling and grammar errors. The heart is there, but it's just not as well executed as the first book. The spelling errors don't completely ruin the experience. It's still interesting. It still has value in reading it, certainly. Next book I want to talk about is one that I also did a video on previously. This is the novella Rage by Stephen King. Rage is about a high school student named Charles Decker who brings a weapon to school and holds a classroom full of other students hostage. This was originally written back in 1977. This novella was connected with several real-life events, allegedly, potentially inspired by this story. Eventually, Stephen King asked for this to fall out of print. He did not want to run the risk of possibly inspiring other students to replicate what was written in the story. I thought that this was a very interesting read. I think the thing that I enjoyed the most about it, you do go into the way he thinks about things, his mental illnesses. And so I appreciate that it touches on those subjects, but does not come across as overly sympathetic. It doesn't come across like these are excuses for his behavior. And that's something that I really respected and enjoyed about the novella. Now, with the kind of climate that we're in currently, it's interesting to go back to a time where it was just kind of intended to be this creepy extreme story, and to see how closely it ended up mimicking what turned out to be strangely common. Next up, we have my sci-fi book. Every month I'm getting through the next book of the Expanse series. This is Cibola Burn. It is the fourth book in the Expanse series. This is by James S.A. Corey. I do like to listen to the audio version. I just think it's really, really well performed by the narrator. It's kind of hard when you're just talking about one book in a series, because if you're not familiar with the first three, then it's like, oh, what goes on here? But let me tell you, this book was fun. It was a little bit of a departure from the other books. The premise of this book is we have gained access to plentiful planets to explore. And so you have this idea of exploration, this new frontier. It's kind of inspired by, in America, the Western Expanse. Back in the olden days when people were in their wagons and they were like, okay, we're gonna go west. And that took a long time. It took generations to be able to travel to the new frontier. We have a new planet. Who's gonna claim it? How do things work here? All of these books have multiple perspectives. So in this book, we have our main character, James Holden. He is the perspective that is consistent so far through all of these books. He is the ship captain of a spaceship called the Rosinante. He ends up having to go to this new planet because he's trying to be the peacekeeper. You have these people who went to this planet because they were refugees who were turned away when they tried to go elsewhere. And so they're like, okay, fine, we're just going to take over this new planet and start over. Well, the UN is like, actually, you're not going to do that. You have no right to claim this planet. We're coming to this planet. Representing the refugees, we have the perspective of Baja Merton. So he's a refugee. They go there trying to start over, but they do end up going to more and more extreme lengths to try to protect their claim, bordering on what would be considered a terrorist. You have a woman named Elvie Okoye, who is a scientist from the UN, feeling like everything she's doing is completely legitimate because it's backed by the UN. And as a scientist, she is very frustrated that there's all these people on the planet already because people are just trampling on everything and she can't keep things clean and like all the way that a scientist would want things to be protected, to maintain the integrity of them so that her research and stuff can be valid and whatnot. And then you have Dimitri Havelock, who we do know from a previous book. He was Detective Miller's partner from the first book, but in this story he is a security officer for the UN, also trying to keep some level of peace, but he ultimately represents the UN. He's becoming increasingly concerned about his supervisor's approach to keeping things in order. And so you have all these different perspectives kind of coming together to tell this story. The refugees feeling like they were there first, the UN people feeling like they have a legal claim to be there. What would have to happen to bring these people together, where all of a sudden all these things keeping them apart and causing all this conflict seems so irrelevant and so unimportant. This is just as good as all the rest. I've loved every single book so far. If you are interested in sci-fi at all, I cannot recommend it strongly enough. Every perspective, you are invested in what they have to say. Every perspective from every book, there is something to connect to. This is where we're really taking a sharp, that's a right turn, but to you it's left. A sharp left turn here. Back in May, Bridgerton season 3 came out on Netflix, or at least half of it. And I had never seen or read Bridgerton, but my Instagram really was like, hey, do you want to watch season 3? It kept advertising to me, and I kept watching all these advertisements, and I was like, I do actually, Instagram, I do want to watch. So of course I had to binge the first 2 seasons because I'd never seen it, and then I had to read the first 2 books, and season 3 is actually based off of the 4th book in the series. So I had to binge the show, and I had to read the books. And I also listened to the audio versions of these books because they are narrated by this woman who I am obsessed with. And I heard like a little clip of her voice, and that is actually the thing that made me decide that I wanted to read these books or listen to these books specifically. Here's what to know about these books. They're all part of Bridgerton, written by Julia Quinn. This is all taking place during Regency time in London. Fancy rich people. It's just like a romance. It's wholesome. There is drama, but there's no horror here. I like both, so it's not completely unrealistic that other people also like both. But if you are not one of those people, then I understand. And these are the last 3 books. So if you do not give a flying fuck about romance, then, you know, later, hopefully, please come back at a later date. The first book in the Bridgerton series is called The Duke and I. And so basically, if you read any romance, you know that there's a lot of tropes and all of that. So if you're familiar with that, the basic trope of this one is fake dating. You have the oldest Bridgerton daughter, whose name is Daphne. This is her romance with the Duke of Hastings, Simon Bassett. Now, the thing that I enjoyed the most about this book is actually the background that they gave to Simon. He, as a young boy, had a very severe stutter. And as a result of that, his father rejected him because his father wanted his son to be perfect. He wanted the boy who would someday replace him to be worthy of the title of Duke. Because he had a stutter, he came to the conclusion that he was stupid. Part of this story is about Simon as an adult who has worked very hard to not have as much of a stutter. His stutter really only comes out when he is very worked up or very upset about something. But his relationship with his father was never repaired because he was an asshole, right? I actually really liked that background for the Duke. I thought that that gave him some layers and that he wasn't just like a handsome rich guy. I really appreciated there being a little bit more something there, you know. Why am I punching? I don't know. Daphne is exactly what she's supposed to be. A woman of the Regency era. She's beautiful and she's pure. You know, women during this time were not getting sex ed, so she doesn't know anything about how babies are made or anything like that. All of that is preserved for them to find out on their wedding night. You know, surprise! They end up doing like a fake dating thing. He doesn't think he wants to get married. He's using her to avoid getting married or hooked up with other people so other people aren't bothering him. She's using him to be more appealing to other men, that, oh, a duke wants her, so of course I should want her too. Like, that makes her like high caliber or whatever. I liked it just fine. The romance was fine. My favorite aspect of it was actually just Simon's background story and his sort of character arc. The second book, The Viscount Who Loved Me. This is about the eldest Bridgerton son named Anthony. His romance with a woman named Kate Sheffield. He has no interest in falling in love. He wants a marriage of convenience. He finds a woman who is of age to be married, and she's the it girl that season. And so he wants to pursue her. However, her older sister is kind of standing in the way. She thinks that he is just a hussy, and she doesn't want him anywhere near her sister. Well, it's the older sister that he ends up falling for. The kind of trope is enemies to lovers. She hates him because he's going after her sister, and she wants her sister to have a marriage of love. Kind of starts off as like a lust thing for Kate, but it ultimately ends up in being a love match. I thought this one was fine. It was fine. Now the third book. This is actually not the third book. I lied. This is the fourth book, but it is the book that season 3 of the show is based on. And this one is called Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. This book is Colin's story, and it is a friends to lovers, and that is my shiz because I like the idea of someone being your friend and seeing like the real you when you're not trying to like impress them, you're just existing and they're your friend, and they see a realistic, accurate version of you, and that's what they fall in love with. That's my shit. Colin falls in love with Penelope Featherington, who he's been friends with since they were children. She's also best friends with his sister Eloise. Penelope has been in love with Colin for a long time, but she's never really told him because she, didn't think he felt the same way, so she kind of kept it to herself. But he's always been kind to her, he's always been good to her, and eventually she feels very, very depressed because she's kind of a wallflower, and her marriage prospects are not going well because she's very shy, wallflower. And then eventually one thing leads to another, and she's down on her luck, and she's like, I have never been kissed, and I'm never going to get married. No one's ever going to want me. And so she asks Colin to kiss her because she doesn't want to live her life and die without at least experiencing a kiss. And so he does. That's the moment where he feels the spark. Eventually it develops and it grows. The show is better than the book, in my opinion. It's kind of modernized a bit. It gets rid of a little bit of the edge to some of these characters because, it's written to be somewhat accurate to old Regency times. Okay, so we got the Regency times, pure and proper, blah, blah, blah. There is smut in these books. So if you are a fan of romance and you are a fan of smut and you don't mind the men are a little sexist, it's the time period, whatever. So if you don't mind overlooking that for the sake of the other stuff, then, have at it. That is my hyperfixation at the moment. I definitely liked this one on a different level than I liked the other ones. And I don't know if it's just because of the trope or the characters or because I relate to the sad little wallflower who... This was a little weird, I recognize, but I'm pretty sure that next month I'll be kind of back on my normal bullshit. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And maybe I'll see you in the next time around. Bye. I listened to the narrator